The hearing began at the third bell of Station Voreth's administrative cycle, which is to say 9:30 in the morning by my watch, and Credo had already said, "Confirm. Proceed," twice before the senior hearing officer finished arranging his hololedger stand. I should explain how I came to be at Thelann Accord Station Voreth in the first place, and why I was sitting in attestation chamber 14, with a medium-sized African gray parrot perched on the back of my chair, because it is the sort of situation that wants context. My name is Milo Carr. I am 44 years old, from a town called Macram in County Cork, and for most of my adult life I have made coffee. That is not a euphemism for anything. I ran a small cafe on Bridge Street for 11 years, good coffee, reasonable sandwiches, a corner booth that the retired schoolteacher who lived above the butcher shop occupied from 8 in the morning until the afternoon news, every day except Sunday. The cafe had 14 seats and 1 bathroom and a sound system I had been meaning to fix for the better part of 3 years. I was content there. I was not restless, particularly. I was not looking for an adventure. The adventure found me because one of the Thelann Trade Liaison's junior staff had a weakness for flat whites, and my address was the closest thing to a proper coffee shop that the liaison office's neighborhood had to offer. She came in every morning for 3 weeks running. Flat white, ham and cheese toasty, table by the window. We talked, the way you talk with regulars, about nothing of consequence at first and then gradually about more. On the morning of the 21st day, she told me the Accord was looking for service contractors to staff a hospitality module aboard Station Voreth for the duration of the trade integration talks, 14 months, possibly longer, and that she would recommend me if I was interested. I was 44, my lease was coming up. The landlord had plans for the square footage that didn't include me, and I had never been off-planet. I was interested. And Credo needed a change of scenery. He had been to the cafe every day since I opened it, perched in the back room during service hours, and the retired schoolteacher in the corner booth had developed an arrangement with him that I will not call a friendship, but that was, functionally, indistinguishable from one. When the schoolteacher moved to his daughter's house in Killarney, Credo spent 2 weeks producing the sound of the corner booth being scraped back every morning at 8, from memory, for no audience. I decided he was depressed. I am not sure that is the right word, but something had gone out of his mornings and he knew it. The new mornings would be good for him. Credo is an African gray parrot. He is 22 years old. I have had him since he was 6 weeks old, which means he has spent 16 years in my company, and in that time he has absorbed an amount of my speech patterns, my morning routines, and my general conversational habits that I find both flattering and slightly unsettling. He is gray as advertised, ash gray on his body, pale gray on his face, with a short blunt red tail and a black beak he uses with the precision of a small deliberate hand. He weighs about 400 grams. He is not a large animal. He is, in the assessment of everyone I have ever known well enough to have them over for dinner, the most persistent conversationalist they have ever met. African greys do not talk because they are performing. They talk because they are social animals who mirror their environment. They pick up phrases, tones, cadences, the sounds that organize their world, and they produce them back in context with a reliability that still surprises me even after 16 years. Credo knows the sounds of my mornings the way a ship knows its charts, precisely and without effort. He knows when the kettle goes on. He knows when the perch goes by the window. He knows the sound of the espresso machine warming up, the sound of a portafilter being seated, the particular hollow knock of a tamper on a counter, and approximately 47 other sounds from the cafe that I stopped consciously hearing somewhere around year 3 of running it, but that he cataloged and kept with the diligence of a small gray archivist. And he knows that when the perch goes by the window and the kettle goes on and the morning sounds start, I say the same 2 words I said to him the first morning I brought him home, which were confirm, proceed. Something I had picked up during a brief and unhappy 6 months working in a logistics warehouse at 19, when the shift supervisor used those words as his all-purpose sign-off for everything from cargo manifests to bathroom breaks. I said it as a joke to the 6-week-old bird. The bird filed it. He has said it most mornings since. I explained all of this to the Thelann Accord Station Voreth Hospitality Liaison Office before I departed Cork. I filled in 3 separate forms about Credo, including one that asked me to describe the animal's threat classification in a text field that allowed up to 200 characters, and in which I typed, "He is a parrot, he talks, he will not bite you unprovoked, and he does not carry any known pathogens compatible with Thelann biology." The form was processed. The liaison office confirmed receipt. A separate office within the liaison office sent a follow-up form asking me to re-describe the audio output of the animal in more clinical terms, which I did. A third office confirmed that the animal's presence was approved on a provisional basis, subject to review. Nobody in any of those 3 offices had actually met an African gray parrot. I had tried in the forms to convey this accurately. He talks is accurate, but it is the kind of accuracy that prepares you for approximately 1% of what it means in practice. People who have not been around African greys tend to imagine something like a budgerigar with an expanded vocabulary, a small creature that produces the occasional word when prompted, then returns to its birdie business. Credo is not this. Credo talks the way the sea moves, continuously, according to its own internal logic, not because anyone asked it to, and not because it is trying to make a point, but because it is simply what the sea does. He talks in the morning. He talks in the evening. He talks when I am on a calm call and he decides the conversation has gone on too long without his contribution. He talks when the room is empty, producing small, careful phrases into the air as though he is testing their weight. He talks occasionally in his sleep, brief fragments, names and sounds I don't always recognize, the stored inventory of everything he has ever found worth keeping. He had been on Voreth for 3 weeks before the hearing. In that time he had cataloged the sounds of my quarters, the sounds of the hospitality module during service hours, the sounds of the corridor outside, the particular tone the station's ventilation system produces when it switches between day and night cycles, and somewhere in there, on what must have been a day I had business in the administrative wing, the basic acoustic signature of a formal Thelann proceeding. I should have anticipated this. I didn't. The cargo attestation hearing in Chamber 14 on the morning in question was routine. I want to be clear that nothing about my situation was unusual or alarming by my own lights. I had a 40-kilogram shipment of specialty coffee equipment, a commercial grinder, 2 portafilters, a small tamping station, and 6 kilos of Ethiopian yirgacheffe that I had brought for the module that needed to be cleared through the Accord's import attestation process before I could collect it from the receiving bay. Standard procedure. I had brought Credo because my quarters on the station did not have a perch holder suitable for leaving him alone for a full administrative session, and because Credo, when left alone in an unfamiliar space, does not simply sit quietly. He talks to himself, loudly, in an increasingly creative vocabulary. I had left him alone in my quarters for 3 hours the previous week while I completed my station induction, and when I returned, he had apparently developed a 17-minute routine that involved reproducing the sound of the station's ventilation system, the footsteps of someone walking past in the corridor outside, and what I can only describe as an editorial commentary on both, delivered in a register I had not previously heard him use. I did not know how to describe this routine. I still don't, exactly, but I did not want to leave him to develop it further unattended. So I brought him. The hearing officer was a Thelann administrator named Thelann, which I was later told translated roughly as something between 4th procedural and senior attester. Grade 7. He was tall by my reckoning, about 2 meters and change, with the pale blue-gray skin of Thelann administrative caste, 4 fingers on each hand, and the faintly luminous secondary eyelids that the species uses in place of reading glasses. He had been doing this job, I was told, for 31 years. He had processed upward of 12,000 cargo attestations in Chamber 14 alone. He had, by all accounts, never had a session that ran longer than 40 minutes. He sat down, opened his hollow ledger, spoke his administrative identifier into the record, and stated the matter of the hearing. Cargo attestation for a human contractor's personal use equipment shipment. Voreth import log reference 37-9-14. Credo said confirm, proceed. Thelann looked up. I said, he does that, don't worry about him, he's not intervening in the record. Thelann looked at me, then at Credo, then back at his hollow ledger. He made a small notation. He began reading out the cargo items for confirmation. Item 1, he said, commercial grinding apparatus, electric 2.4 kilograms. Confirmed, I said. Item 2, manual tamping station, personal use, 0.8 kilograms. Confirmed. Item 3, brewing apparatus components, quantity 2, as listed in the sub-manifest. Confirm, said Credo. Thelann stopped. There was a silence. It was the particular silence of a man who has just heard something from a direction he did not expect and is not yet sure how to classify it. I had come to recognize this silence in my weeks on Voreth. The Thelann produced it at a slightly higher rate than most species I had encountered, which I suspected had something to do with their administrative culture. They were a people who had organized nearly everything they touched into systems, and their discomfort when something failed to sit in a system was of the specific, concentrated variety that comes not from surprise exactly, but from the abrupt awareness that one's categories may need revision. They were not stupid. They were, in my experience, very far from stupid, but they had developed their categories over a long time, and the categories were thorough, and a thing that didn't fit any of them created a very specific kind of pause. The animal, Thelann said with great care, spoke. Yes, I said, he does. He picked up the word from a logistics context. It's conversational. He's not registering an official response. Thelann looked at Credo for a long time. Credo looked back at him with the calm, sideways, slightly assessing look of a bird who has seen many rooms and found most of them unremarkable. He tilted his head left. He tilted it right. He made a small sound that was almost exactly the sound the hollow ledger made when a new field was opened, a faint, soft chime, and went back to looking at Thelann with an expression of perfect and untroubled interest. Proceed, said Credo. Thelann wrote something quite long in his ledger. Then he continued. I confirmed items 4 through 11 without incident. Thelann was a thorough officer, and the sub-manifest for the portafilters was more detailed than I expected. There were questions about the material composition of the filter baskets that required me to consult the original purchase documents on my comm, and we were perhaps 20 minutes into the hearing when we reached the section on the Yurgashev. Item 12, said Thelann, organic vegetable matter processed 6.1 kilograms, classification consumable, subclassification. He paused. He was looking at the subclassification field. He frowned with the kind of administrative frown that means the form in front of him does not match his expectations. This is listed as specialty beverage preparation substrate. It's coffee, I said, roasted coffee beans. The import form uses the term specialty beverage preparation substrate. That's what the form offered. Coffee isn't on your standard item list. Thelann made another notation. It was a longer notation. I could see from the rate of his finger movement across the hollow surface that this notation was approaching the length of a paragraph. I will need to flag this item for supplementary classification, he said. The supplementary classification process requires a secondary attester to review the material category. I am initiating the referral now. Please hold for secondary attester confirmation. He pressed something on his ledger. Credo said, confirm, proceed. Vethansur's hand stopped moving. He looked at Credo. He looked at me. He looked back at his ledger where the referral had just registered as initiated. The animal, he said slowly, produced that output at the precise interval. Coincidence, I said. He hears procedural-sounding language and he produces his phrase. It's a sound pattern association. He's not confirming the referral. Vethansur looked at his ledger. The referral sat in the record, initiated, time-stamped, with Credo's vocalization occurring at the same second as the initiation. He made a very long notation. I am appending a note to the record, he said, that the vocalization was produced by a non-participating entity and carries no procedural authority. That seems right, I said. Please confirm that you understand this notation. Confirmed. Confirm, said Credo. Vethansur put his stylus down on the ledger tray very carefully, in the way a person puts a stylus down when they need to collect themselves before doing anything else. Is he going to do that for the entire session? Vethansur asked. Probably, I said. I can hold him if it helps. He's quiet when I hold him. Well, quieter. Vethansur considered this. He was a professional. He had managed 31 years of administrative proceedings and 12,000 attestations. He was not going to be derailed by a parrot. He picked up his stylus and continued. The secondary attester arrived 14 minutes later. Her name was Voreth Val, and she was younger than Vethansur and had the look of someone who had processed a great many secondary reviews and found them uniformly unremarkable. She sat at the auxiliary stand, opened her own hollow ledger, stated her identifier, and asked for the material in question to be described. Vethansur described the Yurgashev. Voreth Val noted the classification issue. She began the secondary classification protocol, which involved asking me a series of questions about the material's origin, processing method, intended use, and whether it had been subject to any alteration or treatment during transit. It had not. She asked whether the material was biologically active in any form. I said it was roasted and dried, and had no more biological activity than a piece of gravel. She asked whether the intended use, beverage preparation, posed any risk to station life support systems. I explained that the brewing process involved hot water in a sealed vessel and produced a liquid that I would then drink. She asked whether the waste product of the brewing process required any specialized disposal. I said the waste product was damp coffee grounds and that I would put them in the organic waste receptacle. Voreth Val made her notation. She looked at the classification options on her ledger. She selected processed organic substrate beverage class and cross-referenced it with the station's import registry. Confirm, proceed, said Credo. Voreth Val looked up. I said, he's a parrot, he talks. Voreth Val looked at Credo. Credo tilted his head to the left, which is what he does when he's interested in something. Then he made a short, dry sound that was almost exactly the sound Voreth Val had made a moment earlier when she cleared her throat before speaking. Not an approximation. The same sound, produced with the accuracy of a recording, at a volume and pitch that matched the original so closely that Voreth Val's hand went very briefly still. She looked at Vethansur. Vethansur said, I have made a notation. Voreth Val looked at her ledger. She looked at Credo. She looked at her ledger again. It mimicked my vocalization, she said. They do that, I said. It's normal, he's not being rude. He produced, said Voreth Val, with the deliberate slowness of a person choosing every word, an accurate acoustic reproduction of my laryngeal pre-speech clearing behavior. Yes, I said. Within approximately 1.4 seconds of the original event. He's quick, I said. African greys are. He's been doing it his whole life. Voreth Val made a notation that, by the time she finished it, appeared to be longer than anything else in the record. The session ended 42 minutes later. The Yurgashev was cleared under processed organic substrate beverage class. Provisional, with a requirement that I submit a follow-up description of the brewing process within 5 standard days, which I thought was thorough, but not unreasonable. Thelann noted, for the formal record, that the attending contractor's companion animal had produced 11 vocalizations during the session, 3 of which had occurred at procedurally significant timestamps, and that he was flagging the matter to the Station Attestation Oversight Office for review. I thanked him for his time. I lifted Credo from the chair back to my shoulder. He said, "Confirm, proceed." Once more as we left, to no one in particular, and the door sealed behind us. I thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. The Station Attestation Oversight Office, which I had not previously known existed, sent me a communication 2 days later asking me to present myself and the companion animal for a preliminary assessment. The communication was formal in the way that only administrative communications can be. That particular register of language that means everyone involved is being very careful because nobody is entirely sure what the relevant procedure actually is. It cited 4 internal reference codes that I did not recognize, used the phrase audio procedural interference in a context that could have meant anything, and asked me to confirm my attendance at my earliest convenience. I confirmed. The preliminary assessment was held in Room 7 of the Station Administrative Review Block, which was larger than Attestation Chamber 14 and had more chairs than it needed, arranged in a formal tier that suggested the room had been designed for proceedings with an audience. There were 6 Thelann administrators present, seated in a row behind a long bench-style surface, and a single chair for me in front of them. The room was lit from above, from a diffuse source that gave everything a slight flattening effect, as though you were being observed very carefully from a position of total neutrality. I sat. Credo sat on my shoulder. The administrator in the center of the row was named Thelann. I learned this because the administrator to his left introduced him by title and name at the start of the session, and the title was long enough that, by the time it was finished, I had forgotten the first part but retained the name. He was older than Thelann, with the deeper gray skin of Thelann administrative senior rank, and he had the unhurried quality of a person who has spent many years making decisions and has long since stopped being impressed by most things. His secondary eyelids moved slowly. He spoke without hurry. He looked at things the way a man looks at things when he has already been thinking about them for some time before they arrived in front of him. He looked at me for a moment, then he looked at Credo. Credo looked back. "This is the animal," said Thelann. "This is Credo," I said. "He's an African gray parrot. He's 22 years old. He is the animal that produced vocalizations during the cargo attestation session." "Yes," including vocalizations that mirrored procedural language. "He picks up patterns," I said. "He's been around me long enough to recognize what a procedural exchange sounds like, the cadence of it, the back and forth, and he produces the sounds that fit. He's not actually participating. He doesn't know what a cargo attestation hearing is." Thelann wrote something. The 5 administrators beside him also wrote something, though they may have been writing different things, because they took different amounts of time. The one at the far end of the row wrote something that seemed, from where I sat, to be close to a page in length, which struck me as ambitious given the amount of information that had been exchanged so far. "He does not understand the context of his vocalizations," said Thelann. "No, he understands that certain sounds go in certain situations. It's a learned pattern. But the sounds he produces are contextually appropriate." I thought about this. From the outside, yes. From his side, he's just doing what sounds right. Thelann looked at Credo for a long moment. Then he said, "What is confirm, proceed?" I explained. Thelann wrote something. The 5 others wrote something. The administrator at the far end of the row wrote something that took noticeably longer than everyone else's. "You say those words," said Thelann, "in a domestic context, in the morning." "Every morning, yes. It's a habit. He learned the phrase when he was young and he's been saying it ever since." "And what does it mean in that context?" "It means the day is starting," I said. "The kettle's on, the perch is by the window. It means we're open. Go on." I paused. "It doesn't mean anything formal, it's just something I say." Thelann looked at the phrase in his ledger. He looked at it for quite a long time. "It is," he said finally, "a declaration of operational readiness and a directive to proceed with normal activity. I suppose, if you wanted to read it that way. Which is what the animal produces at the commencement of formal proceedings." "By coincidence," I said. "He hears the kind of language that sounds like a beginning, and he says his beginning phrase." Thelann made another notation. His face was doing something that I had not seen a Thelann face do before. A slight tightening around the secondary eyelids that I would later learn was the Thelann equivalent of being very interested in something while being careful not to show it. "Thank you," he said. "We will be in touch." The preliminary assessment lasted 31 minutes. During that time, Credo said "confirm," "proceed," 4 times. He also, at one point, reproduced the sound of the water dispenser in the corner of the room, which nobody had turned on. This caused 2 of the 6 administrators to turn and look at the dispenser, before understanding that the sound had not come from it. And one of them, the one at the far right, who had written the longest notation, did not write anything at all for nearly a minute after that, but simply looked at Credo with an expression I couldn't fully read. I thought about that expression on my way back through the administrative wing. I thought it was probably the expression of a person whose category system had just encountered something that wanted its own category. The being in touch took the form of 3 written communications over the following week, each one slightly longer and more formally structured than the last, culminating in a notification that the Station Attestation Oversight Office, in consultation with the Thelann Accord Administrative Classification Directorate, had established a supplementary review committee with a mandate to assess the audio-procedural output of Contractor Carr's companion animal and its implications for station administrative integrity. The Supplementary Review Committee. For the parrot, I considered writing back to say that the implications for station administrative integrity were nil because the parrot was a parrot and did not understand administrative integrity. But I had learned enough in my weeks on Voreth to know that expressing this view in writing would generate at least 4 more forms and possibly a 6th preliminary assessment. So instead I confirmed my attendance at the committee's first session and carried Credo to room 11 of the administrative review block on the appointed morning. The committee had 7 members. Room 11 had been arranged with a gallery. There were 8 people in the gallery, which may not sound like many, but for an administrative review session on a mid-tier trade station, it represented the kind of attendance that suggested word had gotten around. Station Voreth was not a large community, 1,130 people, most of them on administrative or support rotation. Word traveled at the speed it always travels in a contained space, which is faster than anyone intends and in more directions than anyone planned. 2 of the gallery observers I recognized from the hospitality module's common area, where they came for coffee in the early part of the administrative cycle. They were very careful not to acknowledge me. I was equally careful not to acknowledge them. The committee chair was a senior administrator named Thelann, which I was told meant something like first classification, senior grade. She was small for a Thelann adult, slightly shorter than me, which was unusual, and she had the particular energy of someone who has managed many committees and regards each new one as an administrative problem to be solved cleanly and quickly. She did not appear to have been briefed on Credo in any way that had actually prepared her for Credo. Her first look at him, as I settled into the seat and he adjusted his position on my shoulder, was the look of an administrator who has reviewed a file and is now reconciling the file with the thing that the file describes, and finding the thing considerably livelier than the file suggested. She opened the session by stating its mandate: to assess the vocalizations of the companion animal, determine their classification, and provide a recommendation to the Accord's standing administrative protocols. "Confirm, proceed," said Credo. The gallery shifted. Not much, a slight collective movement, the kind that happens when a room full of people who were already interested in something suddenly become more interested. Voreth soon looked at Credo, she looked at me. "Does the animal know that the session has commenced?" she asked. "No," I said. He heard the formal cadence. He responded with his phrase, "It's a pattern." Has this phrase been consistent across all instances of formal proceedings? As far as I've observed, yes. And in domestic contexts? Every morning. Voreth soon made a notation. She looked at the 7 committee members. 3 of them were looking at Credo. One of them, the one at the far left of the bench, who I later learned was Thelann, now apparently also serving on this committee, was looking at his ledger with the expression of a man who has been thinking about a problem for several days and has not yet solved it, but is certain the solution is close. The session proceeded. Voreth soon asked me a series of questions about Credo's history, his acquisition, his speech development, and the specific domestic circumstances under which the phrase "confirm, proceed" had been established. I answered all of them. I had, by this point, answered versions of these questions several times, and I had developed something like a standard explanation, clear, accurate, and shorn of the interpretive commentary that Thelann administrators tended to read as an invitation to make further notations. The committee members made notations at intervals. Credo talked. Not constantly, but consistently. He produced "confirm, proceed" at 3 separate junctures during the session, once at the opening, once midway through when Voreth soon formally moved from the question phase to the analysis phase and the register of her language shifted in the way it does when a proceeding changes gears, and once when a committee member asked me to confirm a specific detail and I said "confirmed" before the member could complete the follow-up question. He also, at one point, made the sound of my espresso machine starting up, which caused the committee member second from the right to look behind her for the source of it, then look at Credo, then write something very quickly. He reproduced a fragment of Voreth soon's own phrasing, the stress pattern and tonal contour of the phrase "administrative classification," which she had used 3 times by that point, in a way that was accurate enough that 2 members of the gallery leaned forward simultaneously. He said "good morning" in clear English at a moment when the room had gone briefly quiet, in a voice that was flat and clear and entirely without context. He said "confirm, proceed" when Voreth soon formally closed the session, in the same flat, clear voice he uses every morning with no particular emphasis, the way a clock says the hour. The committee met without me for an undisclosed period after that. I was asked to wait in an anteroom with Credo. I sat on a bench and gave him a piece of almond, which I had brought in my jacket pocket for exactly this kind of extended waiting situation. He ate it very precisely and then said "good morning" again, which under the circumstances I found slightly pointed. After 40 minutes, Voreth soon came to the anteroom and told me that a second session would be required, including specialist observers from the Accord's bioacoustic analysis office. I said that was fine. Credo said "confirm, proceed." Voreth soon looked at him for a moment and then went back in. The second session was a week later. Room 11 had been reconfigured. A recording apparatus had been mounted at the front of the room, of a type that the Accord used for official proceedings that required full acoustic documentation. The gallery had more people in it. A second row of seats had been added along the upper observation level. The committee had been expanded to 9 members. The 2 new members were from the bioacoustic analysis office, and brought their own equipment, small black devices placed at intervals around the room. The bioacoustic analysts were named Thelann and Thelann. They sat at the far end of the bench and looked at Credo with the particular attention of people who have been briefed extensively and are now comparing the briefing to the reality. Thelann was compact and precise, the sort of specialist who has spent a career listening to things and has developed a stillness that makes other people aware of sounds they hadn't noticed. Thelann was taller and held a secondary capture device in one hand throughout the session, angling it slightly whenever Credo produced a vocalization. Voreth soon opened the session. Credo said, "Confirm, proceed." The two analysts both wrote something simultaneously. The session was 2 hours and 12 minutes long. In that time, Credo produced, by the analyst's subsequent count, 47 distinct vocalizations. 19 were the phrase "confirm," "proceed," in various tonal registers. 7 were mimicries of sounds in the room, the water dispenser again, a stylus being set down on a tray, the specific click of the recording apparatus switching modes. 4 were English phrases I had not heard him produce in this context before, including "black, please," which was what I said to people when they asked how I took my coffee, and which I can only assume he had been storing since Cork and had found an occasion for at last. He produced a short sequence, 4 sounds, in order that I recognized after a moment as the sound of my front door in Cork, the kettle starting, the portafilter settling in the machine, and the grinder coming to life, all 4 in sequence. At a low volume, with the careful clarity he uses when he is reproducing something he considers worth doing correctly. He produced a 10-second passage that Thelann later identified as a precise mimicry of the ambient sound of the room at its baseline level. The room as it sounded before any of us started talking, reproduced from memory at the correct frequency and volume. The analysts had to compare it to their baseline recording to confirm this. Thelann spent some time on this comparison, and when he finished, he looked at his device, and then at Credo, and wrote for a considerable time without looking up. At the close of the session, Thelann said, addressing me rather than the committee, "The animal is not responding to content. It is responding to structure." "Yes," I said, "that's right. It recognizes the formal conversational structure of an administrative proceeding and produces the appropriate completion phrase." "He recognizes the sounds that go at the beginning of things," I said. "He doesn't know they're administrative. He just knows they sound like a start." Thelann looked at his equipment. He looked at Credo. He made a long notation. "And he has been doing this," he said, "for 16 years. "More or less from the beginning," I said. Thelann wrote for another 30 seconds. Then he closed his device and sat very still. "The animal," he said, to no one in particular, "is a better procedural respondent than most of my interns." Nobody in the room wrote that down, but everyone heard it. The gallery produced a very quiet sound that was not quite laughter and was not quite not laughter. Thelann, at the far end of the bench, said nothing. He had been writing throughout the session at a steady pace, in the manner of someone who arrived with questions and is finding answers, but the answers are generating further questions at a higher rate than he had budgeted for. When Thelann spoke, Thelann looked up for the first time in some minutes, looked at Credo, and then looked at me with an expression I recognized. The expression of a man who is on the verge of asking me something but is still working out how to frame it. The committee's second session closed with a formal announcement that the analysis would be compiled and submitted to the Accord Administrative Classification Directorate within 10 standard days, with a recommendation to follow. The report was submitted in 8 days. A copy was sent to me. It was 31 pages long, not including appendices. The executive summary described Credo's behavior as a consistent pattern of procedural register recognition and contextually appropriate vocalization production, without evidence of semantic comprehension of procedural content, yet demonstrating a high degree of functional alignment, with formal administrative commencement and confirmation language. There were 4 recommendations. The first was that the animal be formally reclassified from companion animal, standard, to companion animal, acoustic class, procedural register category. The second was that any future attendance by the animal at formal accord proceedings be logged in advance with the Acoustic Analysis Office. The third was that a baseline recording of the animal's vocalizations be archived with the Accord's Audio Records Division for reference purposes. The fourth recommendation, which was appended in slightly different formatting from the rest, as though it had been added after everything else was finished, read: the committee further recommends that the phrase confirm, proceed, as produced by the companion animal and as adopted from the contractor's domestic practice, be considered for formal inclusion in the Accord's administrative vocabulary register as a recognized procedural opener, given its consistent alignment with commencement and authorization function across all observed instances. The phrase functions correctly. It has, in practice, served the role of a formal opener in each proceeding in which it was produced. Proposed designation: Doctrine Voreth 1, the standing order. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I put the report down on the table beside the perch and looked at Credo. "Confirm, proceed," said Credo. I looked at him. He was working on the edge of a piece of walnut shell with the methodical attention he brings to anything he considers worth doing properly. He did not look up. "You're going to be doctrine," I told him. He cracked the shell cleanly, extracted what he wanted, and discarded the rest. He clicked his beak once, which is what he does when he's satisfied with a situation. I sat there in my quarters on Station Voreth with the 31-page report on the table and the station's viewport showing the quiet rotation of stars, and thought about the logistics warehouse in Cork and the shift supervisor who said, "Confirm, proceed," to everything from cargo manifests to bathroom breaks, and about the 6-week-old bird who had been watching and filing and waiting for 16 years until the right moment arrived, which turned out to be in attestation chamber 14 on a Tuesday morning, in a cargo hearing about coffee. The consultation with the Administrative Classification Directorate took place 2 days before the formal review session. Just myself, Thelann, and a single administrative aide who made notes. We sat in a small office off the main review block, the kind of room that gets used for things that need to be said before they can be written down formally. The furniture was plain. There was a viewport here too, a narrow one, showing a section of the docking ring and the clean-edged dark beyond it. A supply vessel sat motionless at berth. I could see, from this angle, the small running lights along its spine, and it occurred to me that I still found the view surprising every time, that I was here at all in this place, having this conversation. Thelann looked older in this room than he had in the committee sessions. Not tired, exactly. More like a man who has arrived at the thing he was working toward, and is now not entirely sure whether he feels satisfaction or something more complicated. He looked at Credo for a moment before he spoke. Credo was on my shoulder, looking at the viewport with mild interest. "The phrase," said Thelann, "confirm, proceed, tell me again where it comes from." I told him again, the logistics warehouse, the shift supervisor, the 6-week-old bird at home on a perch beside a window in Cork, the kettle, the morning. He listened without writing. He waited until I was finished and then sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. "In its origin," he said, "it is a signal of readiness and authorization." "It started as a joke," I said. "But yes, in the original context it meant, the thing is ready, go ahead." "And in your domestic use?" "Same meaning, the day is ready, we're starting." "And the animal produces it," said Thelann, "at the moment when things formally begin." "Because that's when the sounds around him sound like a beginning," I said. "He doesn't know about doctrine. He doesn't know about the accord. He just knows what starting sounds like." Thelann was quiet for a moment. The aide stylus moved across the note surface in the silence. Your animal, said Velothnar, has, on every occasion that he has attended a formal proceeding on this station, produced the precise phrase that a proceeding requires at its commencement, without error, without delay, without any brief from this office. Yes, I said, but not because he understands proceedings, because he understands beginnings. Is there a difference? I thought about that. I thought about it for longer than I expected to. Not from the outside, I said. Velothnar nodded. The small, slow nod of someone who has been waiting for an answer to become clear and has found it more or less where he expected. We are going to designate the phrase, he said. I want you to understand that this is not a formality, and it is not meant as a slight to you or to the animal. It is a genuine recognition that the phrase functions correctly, that it has, in practice, done what a formal procedural opener should do, that every time the animal has produced it, the proceedings in question have, after some difficulty, advanced. I understand, I said. Doctrine Voreth 1, the standing order, said Velothnar. Confirm, proceed. The formal language of commencement for all administrative sessions initiated on Station Voreth. I sat with that for a moment. He's going to keep saying it anyway, I said. He doesn't know it's doctrine now. He'll say it when I put the coffee on. Yes, said Velothnar, I know. He said it like a man who found this not disturbing but entirely appropriate. Like the two things, the morning kettle and the standing doctrine of a galactic administrative body, were not in conflict but were, when you looked at them clearly, describing the same fact. He looked at Credo one more time. He will outlive this station's current administrative structure, said Velothnar, mostly to himself. African greys are long-lived. 60 years, sometimes longer, I said. Then we are early, said Velothnar. He made a small notation. Then he closed his ledger and stood, which I understood to mean the consultation was over. Credo said confirm, proceed, as I lifted him to stand. Velothnar's secondary eyelids tightened. He did not say anything. He picked up his ledger and left first, which is apparently what a senior Thelann administrator does when he has gotten what he came for and doesn't need to make a ceremony of the departure. The ratification session was held in the main proceeding hall on the upper administrative level, which I had not been in before. It was larger than anything else I had seen on the station. A tiered oval room with formal seating for 80 and observer galleries running along both curved walls. The floor was pale composite stone, polished smooth, and the lighting came from a diffuse source behind the upper tier's curved ceiling that gave the whole room a quality of being slightly brighter than the spaces outside it, as though it existed at a different altitude. Every seat was filled. The full Administrative Classification Directorate was present, along with the Supplementary Review Committee, the Bioacoustic Analysis Office, and what appeared to be a significant portion of the station's administrative staff on what was technically their off-cycle time. I could see the two from the hospitality module common area. I could see others I recognized from the corridor outside my quarters, from the receiving bay, from the ventilation access point on level 3 that one of the station's maintenance crew used as a shortcut, and who had taken to stopping at the module for coffee in the mornings in the last 2 weeks. I had been asked to attend, along with Credo, as the party of record. I sat in the designated seat near the front, Credo on my shoulder, while the proceedings opened with a formal reading of the committee's report executive summary, the directorate's review findings, and the text of the proposed designation. The hall was quiet in the way that large official rooms go quiet when something is about to be formally recorded that has never been formally recorded before. It is a particular kind of quiet, held, deliberate, made of the collective decision of a great many people to not be the one who breaks it. Voreth soon, presiding, read the designation aloud. Doctrine Voreth 1, the standing order, designation language, confirm, proceed. Purpose, formal commencement and authorization for all administrative and attestation proceedings initiated under Thelann Accord authority at Station Voreth. Effective date, current administrative cycle. She looked up from the document. She looked at Credo. "Confirm, proceed," said Credo. The hall was silent. Then it was not silent. It was the sound of 80 administrative officials writing the same notation at the same time, which is a particular sound, a dry, unified rustle, like a field of grass in a brief wind, that I had not heard before and am not likely to hear again. Dry and purposeful. The sound of a thing being recorded because it happened and could not be otherwise classified. Velothnar, seated in the third row, did not write. He looked at Credo. Then he looked at me. He said nothing, but his secondary eyelids did the tightening thing, and I understood it by now. He had been looking for the right category for 3 weeks, and he had finally found it, and the category was smaller and older and more ordinary than anything the Accord's classification system had been built to contain. Voreth soon formally closed the session. "Confirm, proceed," said Credo at the close. Which was, by all accounts, exactly right. I carried him out on my shoulder the same way I had carried him in. Down the corridor from the main hall, past the door of room 7, where the preliminary assessment had been held, past attestation chamber 14, where it had all started with the Yurgashev, through the connecting passage to the hospitality module block, and along to the door of my quarters. I put the kettle on. I put his perch by the window. "Confirm, proceed," said Credo. "Morning," I said. He looked out the viewport at the pale yellow dwarf Voreth orbited at a comfortable distance, and the deep blue-black behind it, and the slow drift of a supply vessel on final approach to the docking ring. He had been looking at this view for 3 months now, and it had not yet lost his interest. I think it was the movement. He likes things that move at the right speed, not fast enough to alarm, not slow enough to ignore. He watched it for a while. He worked on the feathers along his left wing, one at a time, with the unhurried precision of a bird who has said everything that needs to be said and is not concerned about what was done with it. He has no investment in being understood. He never has. He just says the true things in the right places, and the world arranges itself accordingly. I stayed at Station Voreth for 11 more months after the ratification session. In that time, Doctrine Voreth 1 was used to open 412 formal administrative proceedings. I know this because Sarethval told me, on my last morning in the module, in the tone of a person sharing a statistic he finds both absurd and entirely correct. In 3 of those sessions, Credo had been present twice because I had business in the administrative wing, and once because Velothnar had apparently requested it, through channels, without explanation. In each of those 3 sessions, Credo had said the phrase at the opening. Nobody had found this strange anymore. What they had found by the end was that it made the room settle, that there was a quality to the sound of that voice, that particular flat, clear certainty, that did what an administrative opener is supposed to do. It told the room that something was beginning, and that the beginning was legitimate, and that the work could proceed. I poured the coffee. The first cup was as good as anything I had made in Cork, and the view out the viewport was better than Bridge Street by any measure. Credo said nothing else for the rest of the morning. He had more to say later. He always does. But that morning he was quiet, and the station turned slowly in its orbit, and somewhere in the administrative archive of Station Voreth, in a document with a 31-page body and 4 appendices, a 22-year-old African gray parrot from County Cork had been formally designated the origin of standing doctrine. He did not know this. He did not need to. He had said it correctly every time, in the way he always had, because the mornings had always asked for it, and this was just another morning with more administrators in it. The rooms sounded like beginnings, and he said the beginning phrase, and everything that followed was, in one sense, not his problem and in another sense, entirely his doing. Doctrine Voreth 1. The standing order. Confirm, proceed. I should say something about what life on Voreth was like between proceedings, because the proceedings were not the whole of it, and the space between them shaped things in ways that mattered. The hospitality module was on level 4 of the station's residential ring, a pressurized corridor about 30 meters long, with a service counter at one end, 6 tables bolted to the floor, and a viewport along the outer wall that showed the same slice of space from every seat. My job was simple: be there from the 6th bell to the 12th, make coffee, keep the module running, and serve whoever came in. The Thelann on the station were not coffee drinkers, or at least most of them were not. They had their own beverage culture, a pale mineral broth that I understood to be both a drink and a social ritual, and which I had tried once and found impossible to evaluate because my palate had no reference for it whatsoever. What they came for, most of the ones who came regularly, was something else. The coffee was an excuse. What the module offered was a place that was slightly outside the formal administrative structure of the station, a room where the rank conventions were looser, where a senior archivist and a maintenance technician could sit at adjacent tables without the seniority protocols that governed every other shared space on the station. I did not set this up deliberately. It emerged on its own in the 2nd week, and by the 3rd week I had regulars. Credo was part of the atmosphere of the module, the way the viewport was part of it, and the smell of the coffee was part of it. He sat on a stand behind the counter during service hours, or occasionally on my shoulder while I moved between tables, and he talked, not at anyone in particular, not in response to questions. He talked in the mode he uses when he is comfortable in a space, a low, rolling, self-directed commentary on his environment, interspersed with phrases and sounds from the day's proceedings, and whatever else had caught his attention recently. The Thelann who came in the first few days watched him warily. By the 2nd week they had stopped watching him warily and started listening. By the 3rd week, 3 of the regulars had begun coming in at the same time each morning specifically to be in the room when he started his commentary, which began, invariably, with confirm, proceed, and which they had started, I noticed, to time their arrivals around. I did not mention this to anyone. It seemed like information that, if formally noted, would generate forms. One of the regulars was a young Thelann administrator named Voreth, who worked in the import documentation office 2 levels up, and who had initially come in because the module was on his route between his quarters and his workstation. He was perhaps the equivalent of mid-20s in Thelann developmental terms, junior enough to still be visibly uncertain in formal settings, but competent enough that the uncertainty read as carefulness rather than inexperience. He had started stopping for the broth that I had ordered, and once I understood the beverage culture well enough to source it, and then he had started staying for a 2nd cup, and then he had started arriving 10 minutes before the module opened on the pretext that the corridor seating outside was more comfortable than the common area on his level, which we both understood to be untrue, but mutually agreed not to examine. On the morning after the first committee session, Voreth arrived at the usual time, sat at the usual table, and did not immediately take out his ledger the way he normally did. He looked at Credo for a long moment. Credo looked back with the sideways assessing look. "He does not know what he is doing," said Voreth. It was not quite a question. "He knows what he's doing," I said. "He doesn't know what it means to us." Voreth thought about this. "There is a distinction." "Yes. He produces the correct behavior without understanding its function." "He understands its function in his own terms," I said. "He understands that beginnings sound a certain way and that a certain phrase fits them. That's its function from his side." Voreth was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We have a concept in Thelann administrative practice, roughly translated the authority of the correct thing, regardless of its source." He hesitated. "It is generally considered a philosophical edge case, something to be discussed in theory but not encountered in practice." "How does it usually come up?" In debates about whether an undocumented action taken in an emergency, which later proves to have been the correct action, carries retroactive legitimacy. I thought about that, and the usual conclusion is that it does. That correctness generates authority, retrospectively, when nothing else can be cited. He looked at Credo. This is a more literal instance of the principle than we normally deal with. Credo said, confirm, proceed. Into the middle distance, in the flat, clear voice he uses when he is saying something he considers settled. Soreth Val picked up his ledger and began to write. He wrote for several minutes without stopping. I made his broth and left it on the table and did not interrupt him. This is the context in which the fourth recommendation in the committee's report arrived. Not from nowhere, not as an administrative whim, but from a station that had been quietly thinking about the problem for weeks in every room it occupied. When Velothnar's name appeared on the fourth recommendation, the appended one, in the different formatting, I suspected that the thinking had been going on longer than the committee sessions, and that the recommendation had been written in a form before the committee was convened to make it official. I did not verify this. It did not seem like something that needed to be verified. What mattered was that it was right, in the same way that Credo was right, not because it understood everything, but because it said the true thing in the correct place, and the place accepted it.